What is going on, guys? Welcome to the Wednesday night. It's muted. Okay, we should be good to go now. Happy Wednesday, Lou. Great to have you on. Sorry, a couple minutes late, just getting everything sorted out, but should be a good one today. I'm slightly sick. I
Technical
apologize.
difficulties.
Yep, exactly. So I guess we're always going to go down our random rabbit holes in the conversation, but I guess the overarching theme we want to start with was talking about phosphates, and I know a lot of us are probably chasing too low of a number or worrying about phosphates a lot more than we need to. And I figured that'd be kind of a fun spot to start off on.
Well, I don't know if saying that we worry about them more than we need to is actually correct. When it comes to nutrients in the tank that are going to affect the corals, the phosphates are one of the major ones. There's a lot of nutrients that you can get down close to zero and your corals will still be fine.
Yeah.
Not so true of phosphates. So it's really important to keep an eye on that phosphate level. And in fact, when Tropic Marin started this whole kind of phosphate journey, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, and we were doing all the research and everything. When we landed on a sweet spot, the sweet spot that we first landed on was like the low end was about 0.03 or 0.04 ppm, and the high end was about 0.1 ppm. And if you look at a lot of the Tropic Marin material that's come out that talks about phosphates and optimum ranges, those are the numbers you're going to see. In recent months, I've pushed my sweet spot up a bit. Now I think the low end is more down around 0.06 or 0.05. And I think it's great if you're up in the 0.1 to 0.15 range, a little bit higher. And in fact, if you're not getting algae growth, even a little bit above 0.15 is fine. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
In your mind, is there a level that's too high that you should worry about it? Or is it?
Yeah, when you start to grow stuff you don't want.
But if everything's happy, who cares? Or what do you think?
Well, there is a point at which if there's too much phosphate, it starts compromising the calcium absorption. So, there is a point. Exactly what that number is, I don't know. But it's nowhere near down around 0.15. You got to get up much, much higher to get to that point. But it can, what phosphate does is to start to tie up the calcium in the tank. So if the phosphate gets too high, you have to actually run a much higher calcium concentration in order to still have the calcium available to the corals. So if somebody wanted to run, let's say, an ultra high nutrient system as opposed to an ultra low nutrient system, you could get away with that if you weren't growing a lot of cyanobacteria and dinoflagellates and a bunch of hair algae and bubble algae that you don't want. You could get away with it if you had a correspondingly high calcium, because when that phosphate gets really high, it really does start to compromise the calcium absorption because it locks up the calcium.
So if someone has really high PO4, then they should also have an elevated calcium to kind of balance it out, make sure it's still available.
If it's really high, yes. Now, that being said, there's some very interesting kind of side points about phosphate that are important to understand. One is that the corals don't like to get their phosphate from the water column. That's not really where they want to get them from. And so when we're talking about measuring this phosphate level in the water column, we're kind of barking up the wrong tree a little bit, because that's not really where your corals want to get their phosphate from. They want to get their phosphate from undissolved particulate phosphate, not from the water column.
Just easier for them to eat it than absorb it, in a sense.
Yeah, they don't have a good mechanism to get it when it's dissolved. They have a very good mechanism for absorbing it when it's a particulate phosphate that's undissolved. And in fact, on a coral reef, if you look at the phosphate concentration on a coral reef, it's extremely low, like down around 0.1 ppm. So then it begs the question, why do we keep our tank? Sorry, not 0.1, 0.01 ppm.
So barely.
Super low. So that kind of begs the question, why do we want to keep our phosphates up around 0.1 or 0.15? Because that's not really where the corals want to get it from. Well, the answer to that question is up until recently, we didn't have a way to supply them with large amounts of particulate phosphate that they want. So we had to try to raise it in the water column and let them get it from there. Little Tropic Marin plug here, sorry. But Tropic Marin has our new particulate phosphate product, which is Phosphate. We also have Phosstart for starting an aquarium. And what Phosphate does is to supply undissolved particulate phosphate to the corals, which doesn't now raise the phosphate in the water column. Now you may ask, well, if the phosphate in a natural coral reef is so low, down around 0.1 or so, 0.01, I'm always doing that, 0.01 or so, how are the animals getting their particulate phosphate? And the answer to that is pretty simple. Fish poop. Big school of fish comes by and poops all over the reef and rains down onto the reef a bunch of particulate phosphate. The corals take that phosphate in directly from the fish poop. Now, there's another interesting thing about that goes 180 degrees against what we do in our aquariums, which I think is really fascinating. And personally, I think this is going to be a key factor in the way nutrients are added to reef tanks moving forward. Okay. And that is that think about this coral polyp sitting on a natural coral reef. He's sitting, she's sitting, whoever, they're sitting there in virtually close to zero phosphate environment. Now a big school of Anthias or Heniochus butterfly or, something like that comes by. They poop all over the reef. Now there's a tremendous amount of particulate phosphate that rains down on the corals. They absorb that phosphate. Then a half hour later, they're back to close to zero. So there's a pulsing of the nutrients. 1 minute there's very little. The next minute there's too much. The next minute there's very little again. Well, think about, what do we do in our reef tanks? In our reef tanks, we're always trying to keep a nice, even level, and we're not trying to have anything vary, right? Which is exactly opposite of what these animals experience on a natural coral reef. And I don't have the science to back it up yet, but I think that what we're going to find as we get deeper into this is that this pulsing of the nutrients is actually a key factor in the mechanism that allows the polyps to absorb the nutrients that they need. I don't have the science yet to back that up. So it's just an assumption, but I think we're going to find that out. All of the arrows kind of point in that direction.
So this kind of made me laugh, but in the comments, Bert goes, but we measure inorganic phosphate, not organic phosphate. It's probably this because it's the only thing we have an easy test kit for. I don't know how you'd measure.
This whole thing about inorganic and organic comes up a lot. I just asked Hans Werner about it, and to be honest, I didn't understand the whole explanation of it, not being a chemist. So I'm not sure that I know the answer to that.
Insane Reefer, doesn't carbon dosing take care of the delivery of phosphates?
It helps, and the reason it helps so much is because what the carbon dosing does effectively is to allow the bacteria that have a very good mechanism for absorbing that phosphate from the water column. The bacteria absorbs the phosphate, and now the bacteria is a particle. that enables the coral to absorb the phosphate. So yes, it helps tremendously. It lowers the phosphate in the water column, funnels it to the bacteria. Once it's in the bacteria, now the corals have a much better mechanism. They eat the bacteria and they get that phosphate.
Okay.
So yes, the answer is yes. That to me is actually the single most important result of carbon dosing.
What arm reefer? Do you need to dose phosphate start first, or can you start dosing phosphate feed to an established aquarium?
Good question. If it's an established aquarium, you go right to the phos feed. The phos start is I can tell you what it actually is phos feed plus our reef active, and the reef active helps the biology in an aquarium that's just starting the cycle, helps that biology move forward faster. So the phos feed is what you use in an established aquarium. The phos start is what you use if you're starting a system.
Okay. Poseidon. This really does work. Did on my nano, best colors I've ever had. Nice.
That's great to hear.
That's awesome.
There is something to this, and I don't think that we understand fully the mechanisms yet. But as I said, I think we're going to find out that this pulsing of nutrients is a key factor in the way these corals end up absorbing those nutrients. I think it's going to come up in other nutrient compounds as well.
No, that makes sense. Earlier in the chat, there was some people saying they had their phosphates of like 0.5 and 0.6. So that's one question. So I guess one would be like, at what point is it too high? And I know a minute ago you're talking about using some of the carbon dosing to lower your phosphates. And there's also a question in the chat asking, GFO or rural phos and the different methods. So
yeah, those are good questions.
Yeah.
And the answer is really that it's very system specific. It depends on how old the system is, how much phosphate, how much excess phosphate you have. There's no silver bullet, there's no one answer for everybody. As a general rule, 0.5 or 0.6 is probably too high. Is that the level at which we start to compromise the calcium absorption? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But it certainly is the level that we would start to promote the growth of bubble algae or hair algae or stuff that we don't want to see, for sure. Then we get to the question of, well, what's the best way to reduce it? Is something like ferric oxide hydroxide, GFO, a good way to do this? Well, I'm going to give you my personal opinion. My personal opinion is that it's not a bad way to do it if it's super high, right? But I don't like to see it used in the long run. And the reason I'm not a fan of GFO in the long run, or carbon, activated carbon for that matter, in the long run, is that GFO doesn't take just phosphate out of the water. It takes other stuff out of the water that you want in there. And so I think that, it's a good short-term solution if for some reason you got a really elevated phosphate level, you want to get it down. Water changes are also a really great, if you've got 0.6 phosphate and you do a 50% water change, you're going to get that 0.6 down to about 0.3 something. Yeah. So, so water changes are also a really good way. And when you do it through water changes, I'm not against GFO, don't get me wrong. I just don't like to see it run in the long run.
Yeah.
But the water change is a wonderful way to do this because you're not losing those other compounds that you want to maintain in the aquarium that you do or could lose through GFO or activated carbon.
The other, I used to be a lot bigger into the GFOs as well to lower my phosphates. They've always been high, but now I've started to accept it being a bit higher and not worry about as much. I used to, must be under, 0.9, but now I think it was like 0.16. I'm like, yeah, it's fine. But
I think 0.16 is a great number, actually. Yeah. If you're not seeing algae growth or the growth of anything undesirable, I think 0.16 is great. Anything under 0.2, in my opinion, as long as you're not seeing algae growth, is super, because what you're doing is you're making that phosphate a little bit more available to the coral. In a perfect world, you give them the phosphate because that's the way they really want it.
Yeah. But even like one of the comments before, phosphate's at 0.62, trying to get it down. Nothing bad is happening though, so not in a hurry, which is true, right? If there's no negative impacts, I mean, slow and steady and just.
It is true. Slow and steady is good. I always say this, that, nothing good happens in a reef tank quickly.
What about a big water change?
If you're in a critical situation, then yes, that's okay. But almost nothing good happens in a reef tank quickly. And so slow is good. If you're at 0.6, PO4, and you're not seeing the growth of a bunch of stuff, that's fine, as long as you understand that if all that stuff does start to grow, now it's not going to be as easy to get rid of it. Because in addition to lowering the phosphate level, you have to somehow cut off its nutrient supply besides phosphate. And anything green is going to be able to make some food on its own through photosynthesis. And so, so there's a battle that you're going to fight that could be a lot longer than if you spent the time to slowly lower the phosphate level at this point.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, so the other, I guess, consideration too with like the GFOs and whatnot is I've been more trying to get trace amounts and everything working now too, where it's also going to absorb a lot of that. So you kind of throwing your money away on certain things if you're dosing them when running it. That's another thing that's kind of steered me off from using it as much these days.
Yeah, it doesn't take just phosphate out of the water. It'd be great if it did. But it doesn't take just phosphate. And so you're losing other things that you really want. It is a really good emergency measure for sure. I just don't like to see both of those things, activated carbon or GFO, used on a regular basis, because they take organic matter out of the tank that your corals really want. I know a lot of people that run activated carbon, and to me, the only reason to run activated carbon is if your tank water starts to look a little yellow and cloudy, and you want to clean up and polish up that system water a little bit. And then you run it for a couple of days, and then you throw it out and you're done. It'll clear up your system. It'll clear up that yellowness in the water in a matter of hours usually. Let it run a day or two and then get rid of it.
Yeah, that's fair. I've been I'm all about the ozone now instead of carbon because it gives you most of the same benefits and there's no ongoing consumable. Reef Exotico by Lewis. Thanks for the super chat, buddy. Heard Lou talk about ionic balance lately. For us intermediate reefers, how do you suggest we achieve balance? Lou at ReefStock would love to buy you a tequila shot.
Thanks. How do we? Well, wow. This is a huge question. How do we maintain ionic balance? It is related to what are you doing for your calcium and alkalinity addition? What are you doing for your magnesium? And then what are you doing for your trace elements? Though those questions, it's hard for me to answer without knowing, because for instance, if you're using a 2-part for your calcium and your alkalinity, then we have a whole other discussion about ionic balance. If you're using something other than a 2-part, let's say the true Bowling method or All-for-Reef or a calcium reactor, right?
Yeah.
Then it's a very different discussion what you need to do for your trace elements. So unfortunately, I don't have, unless maybe this person can come back on and tell us what they're doing for their calcium and alkalinity, but without knowing that, it's almost impossible to answer the question because there are so many other huge variables.
Yep.
I will say one thing though. At the end of the day, every time you do a water change, you're pushing the ionic balance towards a neutral balance by a certain percentage. And I'm not one of these people, by the way, that thinks you have to do, you know, a 10 to 20% water change every 2 to 4 weeks. I don't subscribe to that. I want your reef to be fun, and doing so many water changes isn't always fun.
Yeah.
At the same time, it is important to realize that every time you do a water change, you're pushing that system more towards a neutral ionic balance. And so if you're questioning that and you're not sure what to do, a water change is always almost always a good idea.
I've keep in mind my established systems. I'm now starting to be in the mindset of like every like 3 or so months, just do a, you know, like a decent sized one just for like good measure, just to good measure water change. Makes you feel good. That's
Well,
been
I
my
think it's healthy
mentality
for
now.
the tank. You know, I always tell people I travel too much and I work so much I don't keep a reef tank at the moment. But when I did keep my 150, there was very little that was 100% consistent. But there was one thing that was 100% consistent. And that was every single time I did a water change, those animals looked healthier the next day. 100% of the time. And in my world, if there's some button we can push that makes our animals look better the next day, you probably should push that button once in a while. You know, again, not 2 to 4 weeks, 20%, blah, 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 none of that. But if it makes your animals look better, you probably should do it once in a while.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's, I don't know, my mind is still just that bit of a safety buffer. You know, there's contaminants in your tank, it dilutes it, something's out of balance, it helps kind of reset it a bit. So I think it's a good idea every once in a while.
It constantly pushes it towards a more neutral seawater system.
All right. So some shameless questions from my own curiosity. So I splurged on some All-for-Reef and mixed them up and started dosing it to my nano.
I saw your post. Good for you.
Yeah. Oh, so a few questions on that one. One, well, I haven't tested yet. I just put it like 1 mil a day, and then I'm getting a bunch of coral tomorrow, so I'll test once I had them and then dial it in. But I know initially All-for-Reef was said for smaller tanks, but I don't know if you saw my post, but there's people with like 300-gallon tanks using it and like fully subscribed to it. What was the initial thought process of less than, 60 or 70, whatever it was?
Yeah, really interesting question, Devin. Just to clear up for a moment, we have so many maintenance companies now that are using All-for-Reef in much larger systems, and hobbyists that are using it in larger systems. I'm starting to bring it in now in a bulk 5-gallon bucket because that whole thing about smaller, larger system really didn't pan out. The original thinking behind it was very sound, which was this. The trace element consumption in your system is going to be proportional to the calcium and alkalinity uptake. Okay? That is not always true of the magnesium.
Okay.
All right? So sometimes systems will be taking up a lot of calcium and alkalinity, not taking up a lot of magnesium. Other times, the same system could be not using a lot of calcium and alkalinity and using tons of magnesium. Yeah. And I do not have the answer to why that is the case. I wish I did, but I don't. But the simple fact of the matter is that if you look at the trace elements, they will run a very similar kind of ratio of uptake as calcium and alkalinity. Magnesium does its own thing completely. All right. So the initial thought was that in smaller systems, people generally do larger percentage water changes. True. Okay. So if you were using All-for-Reef, which has calcium, alkalinity, trace elements, and magnesium, okay, magnesium is in there as well, the magnesium supplementation. If your tank was using more or less magnesium than what was in the All-for-Reef, that larger percentage water change would mediate that difference.
Okay. Makes sense.
All right. If you did a 30 or 40% water change in a 20-gallon tank, you get rid of 30 or 40% of that magnesium imbalance. balance.
Okay. That makes sense.
Okay.
I see your logic now.
And then in a 300-gallon system, you're not doing a 30 or 40% water change ever.
Yeah.
Maybe you do a 10% or a 5%. And then you're only mediating 5 or 10% of whatever magnesium imbalance there would be.
Yeah.
So the initial thought was All-for-Reef for the smaller systems, carbocalcium with the addition of the trace elements for the larger systems, and do the magnesium separately on its own dosing pump.
Okay.
That way, you could respond to more or less magnesium consumption independently of the calcium and alkalinity and trace elements. Okay.
Okay, that makes sense. So basically, if you're using All-for-Reef on a large system, you may have to tweak your magnesium once in a while.
Well, here's the end result.
Yeah.
That is the theory. In all of this time, though, we haven't had anybody complain about an imbalance of magnesium from All-for-Reef, even in very large systems.
Nice.
Now, I can't explain why it doesn't happen, but we just don't see it in practice.
That's promising.
And having the ability to have your calcium, alkalinity, magnesium, and trace elements all on one dosing pump.
Oh, that's appealing.
It's just too convenient and too simple that if you're not running into those problems, why wouldn't you use it?
I feel like
that whole big tank, small tank thing didn't pan out.
I feel like I'm late to the boat on this, but the whole thought process of like your everything in just one dosing pump, it just simplifies it. You don't have to worry about tweaking stuff constantly. You just dose one thing, and you probably don't even need to test the other stuff very often. It's just imbalance, which is cool.
Yeah, in some systems you never have to tweak it. In other systems, maybe the alkalinity, there's a little more alkalinity consumption. That's if one is going to be off, that's usually the one that's off.
Yep.
Maybe your system uses a little bit more alkalinity, and so then every once in a while you put a little balling B in there, and that supplements that extra little bit of alkalinity, that you need. But having all of that on one dosing pump is just like a dream.
Oh, that's awesome. There's one person in the chat that said they had to add a little extra magnesium, and everyone else says they haven't had to do it. So,
and that would track with the other All-for-Reef components. Like I said, sometimes you need to add a little extra alkalinity, or actually the concern was not that the magnesium might be low. The concern was that you might end up with way too much magnesium in there.
Okay.
And it just doesn't seem to come up a lot.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So there's lots of people asking, where does one get the bulk ones? And I'm curious too, because I'm almost tempted to just try it on my big reef as well. I have no idea how much I have to dose, but I like the idea of trying it.
Yeah, we just started bringing the big 5-gallon buckets in as a special order for some maintenance companies that were asking for it. Yeah. It's going to become a regular item, I think. If you go to the U.S. website, you can look at the Tropic Marin Preferred Dealer Locator tab and find the Tropic Marin Preferred Dealer nearest you.
Okay.
And give them a call and have them special order that 5-gallon bucket for you and get it in. I think eventually you're going to see those. I mean, not like in the next month or two, but I think that eventually you're probably going to see those 5-gallon buckets in the online retailers as well.
That'd be awesome.
It's just too popular a product, and people are using it in large tanks. And the really cool thing about it is, if you add up the cost of your individual magnesium, your individual calcium, and alkalinity, and all your trace elements, if you add all of those costs up, All-for-Reef often comes out cheaper.
Yeah, which is pretty awesome. Yeah,
it's a crazy product.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm excited to try it. I have some sitting on the floor beside me, so let's mix it up. But
well, as you go through, this transition stage, be sure to reach out to me if you have questions, because any transition is always something where questions come up. Generally, during the first day or two, that alkalinity will lag a little bit. It won't show up right away. But then once it shows up, it's pretty consistent. And sometimes there's questions about how do I supplement one or another thing. So if anything does come up, just reach out to me. But it's not usually a difficult transition. People make a lot out of going from 2-part or 3-part, the balling method or whatever, over to All-for-Reef before they actually do it. And then when they try it, they see it's really not that difficult.
Yeah, very true. Jacob, thank you for the super chat. He goes, I love All-for-Reef in my 380. Question, is there an issue with keeping a magnetic stir in my dosing reservoir turned on a low setting? Also, should we be dosing to a calcium level? Oh, that's actually a good one too, because earlier he was saying to test it based on the calcium, not the elk. So it's another good one to dig into.
Yeah, 2 good questions. So the first question is, once it's dissolved into solution, it's not going to fall out of solution. So you don't really need to keep a magnetic stirrer going. No reason you can't if you would like to, but it's not necessary. Once it's dissolved, it'll stay dissolved.
Okay.
The other question is really interesting. We actually have some dissension in the ranks of Tropic Marin about this. I disagree with Hans Werner Balling when it comes to the answer to this question. So if you are using, so let me backtrack one step. Every way of doing calcium and alkalinity addition has its upside and downside, as its advantages and disadvantages. All-for-Reef has all kinds of advantages, all of that stuff in one dosing pump. You don't need to, have 6 different dosing pumps. Yeah. It's super economical. It's super concentrated, yada, 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 all those different things. The one downside of All-for-Reef is that being a single solution, the ratio of the components is fixed. So the amount of calcium, the amount of alkalinity in any given dose is not tweakable. Yep. It's the same, always the same ratio. The ratio of alkalinity to calcium that we put in the All-for-Reef is the ratio that calcareous animals use when they calcify. So if your reef tank is running 100% the way it should run, there's no additional draws on anything, then the All-for-Reef will be the perfect ratio of calcium and alkalinity going in. Okay. In actuality, many tanks use a little bit more alkalinity than they do calcium. Yeah. Than that ratio. The reason for that is that the only things that can take calcium out of solution in your tank is biological calcification or chemical precipitation of calcium carbonate. Nothing, there's no other thing that's going to take calcium out of the system. Okay. Both of those processes also take equal amounts of alkalinity out of the system. Hence the proportion of alkalinity to calcium that we put in the All-for-Reef. There are, however, lots of things that can take alkalinity out of the system that don't also take calcium. So in many systems, the system uses more alkalinity per unit of calcium than the corals and the calcareous animals are using. Okay? So in those systems, if you add equal amounts of calcium and alkalinity, then you're either maintaining the calcium and the alkalinity is dropping, or you're maintaining the alkalinity and the calcium is elevated. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So my preference, since we almost never see it go the other way, my preference is to use calcium as the indicator for the All-for-Reef dose. And then if you notice that your alkalinity is dropping a little bit, you use a little balling B to supplement it. The alternative is, in that system that we're talking about, if you're using the alkalinity to monitor your All-for-Reef dose, you're going to notice now that your calcium is consistently elevating
Okay.
Now, how are you going to fix that? Now we got to do some water changes to get the calcium down.
Okay, that's why. Okay.
So
Makes
it's
sense.
much easier to just add a little extra balling B and
Hmm.
supplement the alkalinity if you need to.
Yeah.
You may not need to. Most systems don't even need that.
Hmm.
But if you're going to need to supplement something, it's probably going to be the alkalinity. So I'd rather use the calcium as the indicator for the All-for-Reef dose because
Okay.
it's easier to fix if there's some imbalance.
No, that makes sense. Okay. Thank you for the detailed explanation. Okay, so there's is a bunch of questions around doing All-for-Reef along with calc. Some are being like, use calc for the heavy lifting, tweak with All-for-Reef, and some vice versa. So any thoughts or comments around mixing it or dosing with calc?
Yeah, you can't mix it together.
Oh, sorry, not mix, but dosing both at the same
Well,
time.
I get that question though.
Really?
Can you mix? Yeah, oh, absolutely. People, because a lot of people that are using Kalkwasser don't want to give up the pH boost
Yeah.
of the Kalkwasser, and they want to know, can they mix the All-for-Reef with the Kalkwasser so that they get the pH boost? But no, you can't do that because
Yeah.
the pH of the Kalkwasser is so off the charts that it screws up the All-for-Reef.
Hmm.
That being said, I have a lot of people that use Kalkwasser separately dosing it with All-for-Reef.
Okay.
Do I recommend it? I don't think it's the optimum way to go
Okay.
for a couple of reasons. The first reason is something that I've felt strongly about for years, actually, even before we had All-for-Reef as a product, which is if your tank system is depending upon the pH boost of Kalkwasser
Hmm.
to run a proper pH, it's a very dangerous situation because the tank may need varying amounts of Kalkwasser going in, winter, summer, with evaporation differences,
Hmm.
and playing with the pH in the tank and having it depend on something I add
Yeah.
seems dangerous to me.
Okay.
Okay.
Fair enough.
So what I like to say is that with the amount of calcium carbonate that exists in reef tanks really want to run around 8.0 to 8.2 pH. They really want to be there.
Hmm.
So if your tank is running a lot lower than that, we should be able to find what the issue is and fix it
Hmm.
so that your tank pH automatically comes up on its own and it's maintaining its own pH. So you don't need that pH boost of the Kalkwasser. Well, this always begs the question. A lot of people say, well, there's better calcification at higher pH. I want to run my tank at 8.6 or 8.7, and I use the Kalkwasser to get up there. I'm not a fan of that approach. So if you want to do that, that's fine. Not a fan of elevated pH or elevated calcium alkalinity to increase the growth rate
Yeah.
of corals. Okay. So then the question is, are there other downsides to running Kalkwasser and All-for-Reef? There's only one significant one that I can think of,
Hmm.
which is the more Kalkwasser you use, the less All-for-Reef you need,
Hmm.
which means you get less of the trace elements
Yeah.
that you need. So if you're using a little tiny bit of Kalkwasser every day, maybe it's not an issue.
Hmm.
But if you're using enough that you're really decreasing the amount of All-for-Reef that would be going in the system, you got to remember you're also decreasing the amount of trace elements going in the system, and that's not going to be the healthiest thing.
No, that's fair enough. So I'll give you some little plugs since I bought this too. I bought the A and K to try my big tank for my trace elements. So
Awesome.
yeah, so I got All-for-Reef on one tank, and then on the water box, I'm gonna try putting those two on the doser.
Have you been doing trace elements in that water box?
Yeah, I have. I've been
Okay.
slacking on it, but I have.
And
So
that's been running how long, that tank?
it's a couple years old now, 3 or 4
Okay,
years.
awesome.
Yeah. So
Well, if you have questions when you're doing the A and K, let me know.
I guess the first question is, what, as a blind guess on 200 gallons with lots of coral demand, what would you guesstimate as a good starting dosage?
Oh my goodness, I'd have to look up the dosage suggestion. There's a starting dosage
Yeah.
suggestion on the on the website. There's also a
Okay.
calculator on the website.
Okay.
To be honest, I don't remember if it's one ml. I think it's 1 ml per 25 gallons
Okay.
per day.
So like
If
8
I
mils to
remember,
start. Okay.
yeah, if I remember correctly, that's a good starting dosage.
Okay. Sounds
And
good.
then you kind of adjust from there,
Mhm.
and so then the question becomes, how do I know how to adjust my trace elements, because I'm not really measuring those other
Mhm.
than ICP once in a while.
Yeah.
It's a really good question, and the answer to that is observing your corals, just watching your corals.
Mhm.
um, it's unlikely that you're going to overdose too much,
Mhm.
if you're not like really going crazy with the dosage. And if you're not seeing any change in your corals, and they're not looking any better in a week or two, then
Yeah.
you probably need to increase
Up
a
it.
little bit.
Okay. Nope, that's fair. So I got to figure out a way to get these in my stand. But yeah, I'm gonna put them on a doser probably in the next day or two and get that going. Pro tip
Awesome.
for the All-for-Reef: get a magnetic stir to mix that baby because it takes a
Yeah,
little
it's
while to dissolve.
super easy to
Yeah.
do it that way. And then, like I say, once it's dissolved, it's
Yeah.
dissolved.
Does
You don't
does
have to
it
worry about
does it change over time? Like, can I mix up 5 gallons of it and just dose it for ages and ages, or is it better
it.
to
No,
do smaller batches more frequently?
it's better to do slightly smaller batches more frequently,
Okay.
because there's a lot of organic substances in there.
Hmm.
So as it sits, you're not working in a sterile environment.
Hmm.
So as it sits and it's exposed to light, it's going to eventually grow stuff.
Okay. Fair enough.
So, and usually what it grows is kind of this black filamentous um, bacteria that doesn't hurt anything, just doesn't look very good. But when you've got something that has enough organic compounds in it like that,
Hmm.
you don't want to let it sit too long, like for months on end, because it's gonna grow stuff unless you're working in a super sterile environment.
Okay, that makes sense. Fair enough. There was a question somewhere a while ago in the chat saying it was yellowing a bit over time. That's probably exactly why.
Yeah, some actually when you see it yellow,
Hmm.
that's usually iron or manganese, iron or sorry, iodine that is kind of being metabolized by bacteria.
Hmm.
Doesn't hurt anything. You can still use it the same way. But whenever you see like a yellow or reddish, brownish tint, it's usually related to iodine or iron.
Okay, good to know. My
Two
my
things, by the way, that are taken up by bacteria super fast.
Yeah. Yes. My quick math the other day for everyone mixing smaller batches, 17.77 grams per 100 mils.
Awesome.
That's how I was making like 800 mils of it for my little Voss dosing bottle from back in the day for the nano.
Yeah,
So I
it's
was like,
good to have it
yeah.
not sit around too long. I mean, it can
Mhm.
sit for a few weeks, but when you start looking at a few months, it's going to end up growing something.
Well, that's fair. Yeah, no, that's fair enough. I was looking at some of my old things where I mixed up. I had like 4 or 5 gallons of dosing, and some of them were clean. The others are like, not as good anymore. It's like maybe I should use smaller dosing containers.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to go about it.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, so that's good. Those are my selfish questions out of the way.
I'm excited that you're trying it. I'm hoping I want you to let me know how you make out.
No, I definitely will. This is like I think it's the perfect solution for my Goni Nano too. With trace, everything's just one pub.
Have you been
Love it.
doing trace elements in the small tank?
No, I've done nothing but water changes so far. This
Okay. So
so it's just started with it a couple days ago.
so you're going to see a huge difference. How
Yep.
long has that tank been running?
2 months maybe.
Oh, it's a brand new tank.
It's maybe a little longer. Yeah, no, it's a little nano I set up. I don't even know, 3 months max, maybe less.
Oh, nice.
But
Okay.
it's
So it's not like a long established tank that
nah,
now you're going to see big differences
no,
in.
this is a new one, but it's almost exclusively Gonis with a couple Zoas and
Oh,
whatnot. But
nice.
yeah, so I'm just trying to whole things is gonna be a rainbow of Goniapora pretty soon.
Oh, nice. Sticking your
Yeah,
neck out there with Kevin, huh?
it's gonna be good. It's gonna be good.
Nice.
Yeah, so that one 100% all for reef, but I'm intrigued to know that these 5 gallon buckets are coming because I am not gonna lie, I'm tempted to try it on my big tank and see.
Yeah.
Just less calcium reactor, dose that, trace all in one. I think it's a cool solution.
Yeah, we have a lot of people using it in much larger systems. That's why I'm bringing it in that bigger
Mhm.
size.
Yeah, well, that's really cool. In the chat, if there's any questions that you asked and I didn't answer, which there's probably many, feel free to ask them again. Dun,
I
dun,
have to
dun.
show you my Coral magazine mug.
Oh, very nice.
And Mark Levinson, the
Yeah.
new editor, I have to show you the bottom. I don't have it empty yet, but
Nice. That's awesome.
we're always on the
Yeah.
back outside cover of Coral magazine,
Yeah.
so it made sense to put us on the bottom of the mugs.
That's awesome. It's like the secret logo every time you take a sip. You're like, ah, yep.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's my new live stream mug.
I like it. Okay, one-armed reefer. What about dosing a limifos rapid? I've been dosing diluted. Scrolling away. Diluted mine for the last year, so keeping my phosphate stable.
Yeah, so a limifos rapid is lanthanum chloride,
Okay.
and it's a really good band-aid or emergency solution for a high phosphate level that you need to get down rapidly. Not to me the best solution for long term,
Mm-hmm.
because all the lanthanum chloride does is to bond the phosphate and have it precipitate out of solution and stay out of solution. So what happens is that you're not getting that phosphate to the corals that need it.
Mm-hmm.
So if your phosphate level is high, I'd rather see you do carbon dosing
Yep.
so that you're funneling that phosphate to your corals that need it, rather than just throwing it out by precipitation.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, this is why GFO is also sometimes a little bit an issue, because if you run it all the time, you're taking all that phosphate that your corals want and you're just getting rid of it in the GFO rather than giving them a mechanism for getting it. So nothing wrong with the lanthanum chloride. It works really well. There's very little downside to it as long as you don't use tons and tons and tons of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's super effective. It just doesn't get the phosphate to go where it's really needed. It just gets rid of it.
Okay. No, that's fair enough. So it's a lot more beneficial doing the carbon dosing method where it's actually getting to the corals and feeding them.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Bless you.
Thank you. Quick mute. Dedicated reefer Sparkly. Thank you guys for the super chat. Okay, any other questions in the stream? Let me know. I'm semi-feverish right now, so I'm surviving.
Oh no.
That's okay. Just started All-for-Reef. I needed this chat.
I wanted to make sure that we mention Devin tonight. I really, really hope that people go to the Macna website, the Macna website. Check out Macna this year. We'll be in Orlando at the Swan and Dolphin.
So you're changing it up and doing a lot differently this year, right?
Yeah, we're doing things a lot differently. We are Friday is our education day. There's different tracks. There's 12 different lectures, and you get to pick what lecture you want to hear and at what level you're taking that lecture. So you maybe want an introductory lecture to lighting, but you know a lot about filtration, so you want an advanced filtration lecture, or you want to know about fish diseases on an advanced level. So you can cross tracks. You can pick a beginning lecture in one track and an advanced lecture and an intermediate lecture. So Friday is all education day. And then on Saturday and Sunday, we have the show floor will be open. We are going to have a couple of general sessions speaking, general speaking sessions on Saturday and Sunday. But it is a little different this year with the education day being on Friday. But if you want to learn about reefing, Macna is a little different than the other conferences that happen each year, because Macna is really about education. And if you want to learn about reefing, if you want to be with the people that want to learn about reefing, Macna is the conference to go to. It's going to be August 30th, 31st, and September 1st at the Swan and Dolphin in Orlando. Also, I got to put a plug in for Macna, the Marine Aquarium Society in North America. I got to put that plug in because now I'm VP. So,
Yep.
so a little selfless plug there. But I encourage everybody to think about becoming a member of Macna, because, you know, one of the things that we've changed, our new board of directors that we've changed, is that for many years, the only benefit of being a Macna member was you got into Macna an hour early. But now there's tons of benefits for Macna members. Discounts at all of the real important online retailers, saltwateraquarium.com, BRS, ICP Analysis just raised their member discount from 15 to 20%.
Nice.
Coral Magazine has discounts. So there's all kinds of discounts now when you're a Macna member. So I encourage people to go to the Macna.org website and sign up for membership as well.
How much is it to become a member?
There's different levels of membership. If you want to just do the old version of the membership where you just get into the conference an hour early, you can do that for, like, I think it's $35 or $25, something like that. And then the full individual membership with all the discounts is $75. And I'm telling you, you eat up that $75 in discounts in no time.
Well, that's what I was just thinking. If you're getting, you know, discounts at, you know, like BRS and Saltwater and, like, you know, the major stores online, it probably pays for itself pretty quick after you order
I
enough
think
stuff.
It pays for itself very quickly.
Yeah, that's a good excuse. I like it. Excellent. The Swan and Dolphin, actually, I think I was at that one. That's a very nice hotel too.
Yeah, that was 2019. We were there.
That was the hurricane year.
and so we're back there again in this year. We're excited. It was a really fun venue to be at. And when if you're bringing the family, you're right. There's buses to Disney all day long. You're right in the Disney complex. By the way, we have special hotel pricing through the Macna website. We also have special Disney tickets that are not available any other way. So there's all kinds of benefits, especially if you're going to bring the family. You and the family are going to go to Disney. You can get all kinds of special discounts through Macna.
That's probably one of the best excuses to get your family to a reefing show.
It's a good excuse.
Yeah, I like it.
I like it.
It's good. Sneak an aquarium show and a vacation all in one. It's a good strategy.
Totally. 100%.
No, that's awesome. So I don't know. I'm going to have to try and make it this year. So it's always lots of fun.
Well, we hope to get you there, Devin.
Hopefully. Yeah, well, I think that was a good one today. I think I'm going to wrap up pretty quick here because I'm just surviving, but I definitely appreciate you coming on today. Tons of great information as always. I do have to lure you on more often because it's always great chats.
As I've told you, Devin, anytime you want, I'm always available, always ready to be on. Hope you feel better.
Thank you.
Take some cough. I had this. Take some cough drops that have zinc and echinacea in it.
Yeah, that's the secret.
It's the only thing that helped me.
I'm sipping on Neocitrin on the side.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, good luck. I hope you feel better.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Hopefully everyone enjoyed it. You know, if you got any questions afterwards, put them in the comments because I'm going to lure Lou back on in a few weeks, maybe next month sometime, and we'll hit them on round 2. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed it. Hit the like button. Appreciate it, guys. Super chatted and for joining us for the stream. Thanks, guys.
Night, everybody.